Within the world of cryptozoology, there is perhaps no other mystery creature that is as widely talked about and discussed as the Sasquatch. The massive ape-like wild men have become synonymous with the world of cryptids and have produced countless weird tales that range from the somewhat plausible to the completely insane. Hovering here in the realm of the latter is the case that I am embarrassed to say I only recently stumbled across, but which struck me with its spectacular imagery and near absurdity. In a very intriguing historical oddity, there have been reports of an actual war between humans and Bigfoot, which seems to have been mostly forgotten, yet in some circles, much talked about. If it sounds truly insane, it is because it is. But let's take a look. The very bizarre account takes place in 1855 in the region of the present U.S. states of Oklahoma and Arkansas, where the once mighty Choctaw nation of Native Americans once ruled over all they saw. In this year, there was an apparent scourge of unseen bandits venturing forth from the wilderness to steal vegetables and even livestock. This might have been the end of it, if it were not for the claim that the trespassers are also said to have graduated to kidnapping people, mostly children, which provoked a fierce reaction in the tribe. A search party was allegedly formed composed of a group of uncommonly large cavalry warriors called the Light Horsemen, the largest of whom was the towering Hamas Tubby and his 6 sons, who were widely reported as standing around 7 feet or more in height. These real giants, along with a contingent of 30 other very large and fierce horseback riding warriors, headed out led by a part French, part Choctaw general by the name of Joshua Lafleur, and their mission was to find these culprits and put an end to their reign. As they headed out into the wilderness in the early morning hours from the tribal capital in Tusculoma, fully armed with high-powered rifles and pistols and thirsty for vengeance, these menacing, proud warriors no doubt thought that it would be a simple matter of routing some ragtag group of bandits. Yet, they were in for quite a bizarre surprise, to say the least. The group of warriors penetrated deep into the region now known as the McCurtain County Wilderness Area, a present-day Oklahoma. And after about 8 hours of riding nonstop through the blazing June sun, they stopped at a spot near the Clover River to rest and eat, before remounting and continuing on the last leg of their journey. It was nearly 14 hours of almost non-stop riding when the men reached the area where the bandits were said to be most active, and it was here that Lafleur suddenly gave the order to halt, as if he had seen something that had caught his attention. Using a crude telescope, Lafleur peered off into the distance as the men rumbled amongst themselves and the horses huffed and chuffed. The general claimed that he could see something moving about ahead, and he voiced his confidence that it was the enemy before putting his telescope aside and giving the order for the warriors to charge. The massive bloodthirsty warriors must have been quite a sight as they howled and rushed their horses through the trees in a mad dash into battle, weapons drawn and ready to fight. Yet their powerful drive forward was soon brought to a halt when the unbearable stench of decay hit them like a wall, and their steeds began to inexplicably buck and rear in abrupt, profound panic, knocking several of them to the mossy ground to writhe around, hacking and coughing. Such was the intensity of the suffocated olfactory assault. Some of the warriors, including the Tubies and Lafleur himself, were allegedly able to control their animals and advance past this nauseating wave of rotting stink to rush towards the bandits, and as they exploded out into a forest clearing, the source of the Stygian stench was clear. There in the center of the clearing, they found what was described as some sort of an earthen mound that had embedded within it and strewn about it numerous corpses laying in various levels of decomposition, drawing a fog of flies that droned all about the startled warriors. Of human bandits there was no sign, but looming nearby were 3 enormous ape-like creatures covered with hair, so tall as to dwarf the even most statuesque of the Tubies themselves. These beast-men purportedly stood there glaring in their direction, completely unafraid of the tribal warriors. What purportedly followed next is just as dramatic and over-the-top as any action movie. Lafleur is said to have charged the strange beast without hesitation, pistol and saber in hand, and howling the whole time. One of the creatures stepped forward and lashed out with a massive hand to swat the general's horse on the side of the head, and with a tremendous blow sent it sprawling to the ground dead. Lafleur was ejected to the ground but was soon on his feet with his pistol blazing, managing to hit the wild man several times but barely slowing it down at all. Even after sustaining several gunshot wounds, it barely bled at all. It seemed as though it didn't even feel it, and it lunged forward to grab the man by the head and ripped it clean off. All of this had happened before the others even had time to react, nor indeed even process the situation at all, as they had all witnessed it in a wide-eyed stupor. Upon seeing their general slump to the ground without a head, as the vicious ape-like creature loomed over his carcass, they produced their rifles and launched a withering volley of bullets at the monsters, which managed to drop all but one of them. The grievously injured creature purportedly limped off in a bid to escape, but was set upon by one of the Tooby brothers, who pounced and apparently cut its head off with his hunting knife. In the aftermath, it was just a few scattered native warriors, poised and ready for the next attack that would never come. The smell of gun smoke and the stench of dead bodies, feces, and urine lingering all around them. And in the background, that Tooby brother crouched over the hulking beast with blood on his knife and on his hands. The natives then went about the grim work of burying the dead, finding the bodies of at least 19 children among them. And the bodies of the hulking beast were burned on a bonfire. It is without a doubt a harrowing, terrifying tale filled with mysteries, monsters, and sheer otherworldly bizarreness. The tale has been passed around the internet quite a lot, it seems, and if it seems too good to be true, then it may be because perhaps it is. The tale does indeed incorporate various historical facts, as LaFour seems to have indeed been a real person who died in 1855, and the Toobies are apparently real as well. But that means little in the larger picture, as any historical figure can be inserted into any wild story you would like, sort of like fan fiction. Not helping matters, while the story's made its rounds on the internet, the best source I can truly link it back to is a book with a rather unwieldy title of True Bigfoot Horror, The Apex Predator, Monster in the Woods, Cryptozoology, Terrifying, Violent, and True Encounters of Sasquatch Hunting People by Jeremy Kelly, which seems to have just a collection of unconfirmed Bigfoot anecdotes, as well as reviews that are, well, let's just say, not so kind. That's not to say that it's all bunk, but there's very little in the way of actual verification or corroboration of this amazing tale. And for all intents and purposes, it may as well come from the depths of someone's imagination. Nevertheless, from this source sprung a persistent Bigfoot legend, all without any way to know just how believable it really is, further submitting its power in the world of the weird. Is this just a case of an urban legend in the making and twisting of history? Or is there something more to it? Whatever the case may be, it certainly is a strange account. As many of you know, I've been trying for months to reach out to Rob Lowe to get him on the show to tell his own Bigfoot encounter and to talk about all things weird. But that's easier said than done. So I did the next best thing and found the best account I could find, written by Brian Brown of the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. I am reaching out to Brian Brown and will hopefully have him on the show over the next couple of weeks. But in the meantime, this is the story of Rob Lowe out at Area X when he thought he was going to be killed by a Bigfoot-like creature in the Ozarks. While filming for his new A&E docuseries with his sons, Rob Lowe said he feared death in an experience with a Bigfoot-like creature in the Ozark Mountains. Lowe told Entertainment Weekly that he and his two sons were lying on the ground, thinking they were about to be killed while camping, looking for a creature locals refer to as the wood ape. The actor tells Entertainment Weekly that he knows his story from the Ozarks between Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma will make him sound like a crazy Hollywood kook. Lowe and his sons, Matthew and John Owen, were filming for their upcoming new show, The Lowe Files, in which the trio investigate mysterious things from across the United States. We were 100 miles from the nearest town, Lowe teases EW. We spent 45 minutes on the most rugged, brutal mountain trails. It's first thing in the morning. There were a lot of serious former military men with loaded weapons. Then something starts approaching our camp that is defying their orders to stop and their warnings that they are all armed. The Wood Ape episode would eventually become the hour-long season finale of Season 1 of The Lowe Files. Brown goes on to write, I honestly didn't think anything would happen. The premise wasn't one that I had predicted would be very conducive to encouraging apey behavior. Dragging a large Hollywood TV production crew way out into the bush for a few hours one night, their vehicles and gear, and one of television's most recognizable stars with his two young adult sons. I had seen enough episodes of Finding Bigfoot to know nothing was far more likely than something. But what the heck, I figured. Time spent in the woods is never wasted, and it might be fun seeing how the sausage gets made in reality TV. But something did happen. A couple of somethings, in fact. But they didn't happen exactly the way they looked on the show. So this is my personal remembrance of the behind-the-scenes adventure that was episode 8 of the Lowe Files, The Wood Apes. Let's back up. TV production companies have reached out to the North American Wood Ape Conservancy many times in the past, asking us to be a part of their shows. We invariably say no. Sometimes they ask more than once, but no remains our answer. In fact, when the Lowe Files folks originally contacted us, they got our standard answer. They got it the second and third time they asked too. That was before they revealed the real premise behind the show, and that our scientific approach is what drew them to us, and that Rob Lowe was attached. Rob has had a lifelong interest in the subject of what we call wood apes, we discovered, and has discussed it publicly on several occasions. After they made many assurances that we would be portrayed as we are, serious and dedicated, and not in whatever way made for the most entertaining hour of television, and agreeing to make a modest donation to our organization, we eventually relented. Nobody seen on screen from the NAWAC was compensated in any way. The first time we've done that for an active TV production in a decade. We met them in the Choctaw Mountains in southeast Oklahoma, not the Ozarks as the show indicated. The Ozarks and the Choctaws are adjacent, yet distinct ranges. In any event, they came rolling up in about a half a dozen vehicles, including at least 2 motorhomes and a minivan, and the crew poured out bristling with cameras and boom mics moments before the Lowes pulled in driving their tricked-out Ford F-150 Raptor. A serious case of truck lust ensued, but I endeavored to maintain my professional demeanor. And then we just jumped right in. No preamble, no introduction. The meeting you see on the show is the first time we walked up to any of them directly. We barely had time to say boo to the crew who had just landed in force. To me, it seemed somewhat awkward as we hadn't really practiced anything or discussed what to say. It was at this point I noticed the first adventures in creative editing problem. In real life, I related at least 2 separate events, including encounters I've had with wood apes, but on the show they compressed them into one in such a way that made no literal sense. My initial impression of the Lowes was that they were genuinely interested in hearing what we had experienced and the subject matter in general. They were obviously very close and enjoying one another's company. Rob in particular seemed quite engaged and animated as we related various events and suppositions we had developed over years. And then, just like that, the entire bizarre convoy was driving into the woods. At one point, we passed a family on ATVs driving in the opposite direction of the forest road. Can't imagine what they thought they were seeing. Certainly a forest like none other they had encountered on that road before. We had to stop a short way in because none of the serious off-road vehicles could get to the campsite we called Tosh Station. The road was just too precarious. Rocky and narrow, our people regularly deal with damage done by it to their vehicles. No way the crew was getting in driving their minivans and campers. We deposited the bulk of them at a nice wide clearing by the side of the road and went in the rest of the way with a skeleton crew that seemed to number a dozen people, not counting the Lowes themselves. Everyone piled in the backs of pickup trucks or stuffed into their cabs. Except for the Lowes. My friend Brandon Lentz was chosen to ride with them in the truck that caused lust in my heart, and I'll probably always hold that against him. Along the way, we found what might have been a nut crushing station. We found these from time to time in the mountains around there. This one didn't have any nut remains on it, but did have flakes struck from the hammer stone still on the anvil stone. Intriguing, but inconclusive. We pressed on. We encountered a mature tree down on the trail, resulting in some muscular demonstrations of the abilities of the Ford pickup platform. When we couldn't move it and we realized we didn't have any way of cutting it, the truck simply drove right over it. A time where significant ground clearance came in very handy. In lesser vehicles, the show would have ended right there. I'm sure the Ford people would have liked to have seen their product placement dollars hard at work in that situation. We arrived at the campsite and in order to take advantage of the remaining daylight, immediately broke into 2 groups, as shown in the episode. We each went separate directions on a loop trail and we met up halfway through. The on-screen text said we were 4 miles from the campsite at one point, but in reality it couldn't have been more than a quarter of a mile at its furthest. And this led to the real adventures in editing crime. The one time I sat up and yelled at my TV. Here's what happened. Rob, Brandon, and I were walking along, scrambling over down trees and discussing various aspects of our research. At a certain point, I realized I had no idea where we were. Tosh Station was not our regular research location, and was used for the show primarily because it was the least arduous drive with the most seclusion. I had never been back there before, and have not been back since, so in retrospect, I was probably not the guy that should have been leading one of the two groups. I knew we were getting close to camp, but didn't know exactly where it was. I radioed to them to make noise, and that's when you see on the show Daryl Collier fire his weapon into the mountainside, causing something to bolt and run up its slope. The reason Daryl fired is not explained in the show, and it makes it appear rather random, which is problematic. But that's not my real issue. Still getting to that. But first, an aside. I'm very comfortable hearing my own voice. Unlike most people, I like how I sound. But seeing myself on TV, that was new. And I'm not sure how well I like that, especially when on screen with this freakish genetic specimen that is Rob Lowe. He makes everyone look at least 25% older and fatter. Yeah. Anyway, not long after Daryl fired his weapon, we were back on track. Then the three of us heard a perfect, clear whoop from behind us, not too far away. Then we heard another whoop, perhaps a response, from the opposite direction across the creek. The first whoop was the best one I've ever heard in those mountains. Both were recorded on camera, pretty clearly, though they're barely heard on the show. They were so perfect, my initial impressions was that we were being fooled by Rob's sons or the production crew back at camp. And then, when we were moving to investigate, we bumped into our friend Mike Mays, coming from camp to find us. In real life, I asked him if he had made the whoop, still not entirely believing we heard such a perfect example with a TV camera running, though the return whoop could not have been him. And he said no, it wasn't him. They've edited the show, so it looks like he admitted it was him. But he never said anything like that. No way do members of the NAWAC do that to one another, and there's few people's word I'd put as much stock in as Mikey's. When we got back to camp, there seemed to be some confusion with Rob as to the source of the whoop. You can see this on the show. He apparently still thought it was Mike, even though Mike had clearly denied it just shortly after we heard it. My theory is the editors spliced the event together to make sense of Rob's confusion. Unfortunately, in doing so, they made Mike look like somebody not nearly as serious as I know him to be. In retrospect, it's difficult for me to explain the whoops in any other way than they were produced by Apes. As the show indicates, a few of us thought we heard a faint whoop earlier in our walk. Both teams did, though I didn't. Then we hear two more when we get closer to camp. There was absolutely no sign of any other people anywhere near us, and the road was blocked by downed trees in both directions. Along with nobody outside of our small group knowing exactly where we would be, the possibility of outside interference and hoaxing is near zero. Then there was a bunch of milling about camp. We took some cheesy promotional images, and I was told that I could eat from the talent food because I was wearing a mic. That was a nice granola bar, let me tell you. Then all the crew had to bug out because they're only allowed to work a certain number of hours in a day. That left only me, Mike, Daryl, Paul Bowman, and Brandon, with the three Lows, and their field producer Jeff, who acted as a cameraman for the rest of the night. Not a lot of any significance happened for a while, not until it got late. From the location of our camp, some of us were hearing faint ape-like pant hoot sounds. Quiet, but seemingly pretty close. This led Daryl to take Matthew Lowe and Brandon a little ways from camp, down by the creek, with a couple of thermals, to sit and observe to see what they could see. It was late and dark, but the thermal scopes see in heat, not light, and anything with a temperature would show up. After a bit, as I recall, Brandon radioed to us asking if someone was on the road. Jeff the producer was, and Brandon thought that he was seeing him, so we pulled Jeff back closer to us. But he was still seeing what looked like a person. Only this person was showing up as uniformly bright in the thermal, where a person would be modeled as different amounts of heat leak through their clothes. Hot white face, darker under hair, patches of heat on the torso, etc. From Brandon's perspective, it appeared to be swaying slightly. Then it dropped to the ground and out of view. Matthew also saw something. According to my video of Brandon's post-encounter interview, Matt saw something dart away. We were discussing this event and pointing in the general direction of where whatever they saw had been, when we saw two small spots of white light. As shown in the episode, we had been discussing wood ape eyeshine earlier in the day, and I, in particular, am always looking for it, having seen it several times over the years. With the still fresh encounter hanging in the air and the light showing up, from our perspective, pretty much where Brandon had seen the figure, my mind immediately thought we were seeing eyes. In retrospect, I should have been circumspect. The eyes were white, and typically what we believe as ape eyeshine shows green or orange. I have seen suspicious white eyeshine, but never one I could confidently say it was ape-related. Also, it was very bright. Ape eyes seem to reflect a great deal of light, making them visible even in incredibly low light conditions. But these two were bright. I blame the heightened sense of the post-thermal event for making me jump too quickly to assuming the light was ape-related. In any event, the lights seemed to move in a weird way, and then there was more of them. They went from looking marginally like eyes to looking more like people with flashlights. We called out to them, but they didn't respond. They would stop for a bit and then go again, but we never heard a reply. In short, this was easily one of the strangest things I've ever experienced in a place noted for strange things. Eventually, as is seen on the show, the mystery resolves itself. It was an overland club called Arklatex Off-Road that had gone for miles and miles that day, mostly on nasty roads, and they were looking for a way out. They insist that they were not lost, and I suppose in the sense that not all who wander are, they weren't, but the lead driver told us at the time they were. Once their caravan rolled through camp, we filmed a little bit more, and then the Lows tore off into the night in their truck of my dreams. The entire episode with the Overland group is portrayed very confusingly, I thought. A lot of jumping and cutting as if the footage had been put into a blender. Little of it was in the order in which it actually happened. None of it made any sense. But I don't make TV shows, so what do I know? However, the appearance of the group well demonstrates why we never performed serious operations in that location. The fact that there was a through road made it inappropriate for us, and the TV event, as random and as weird as it was, highlights that. We can't operate in a space without a much higher degree of control over who shows up, for a variety of reasons. Turns out, our episode was the season finale. I'm glad we were able to provide some drama for them, even if it didn't always play out how it was shown. I will admit now that I presume the show and its concepts were a bit of an ego thing for Rob, but after watching all the episodes, including ours, I find myself sort of moved by the whole thing. If given the chance to go on a series of adventures with my son, especially in that truck, I'd jump at it. Ratings be damned. I don't think that it's a coincidence he did this shortly after they both left home for college. My son recently did the same, and I find myself wistful for times like those the Lows shared together. It may not be the best show ever made about weird paranormal subjects, but I think it had heart. And that's not nothing. This next story is about a woman who reports having a visual encounter through her kitchen window in Woodville, Tennessee. Monica Rollins said back in 2001 she saw a Bigfoot in her backyard. He stood about 7 to 8 feet tall and weighed about 800 to 1,000 pounds. It was black and hairy all over and smelled worse than a skunk. It had arms like an ape and it looked prehistoric. It was very shocking to see. Most recently, a teenage boy claimed to have seen Bigfoot in the Woodville area. My son has told me recently that one night something that stunk came close to the house by the bedroom where he was sleeping. Whatever it was had moaned and groaned and he could hear it breathing. My son lives in the same house where I saw the Bigfoot in Woodville, Texas. The property is densely forested with pine and oak trees. There was a large amount of wild strawberries growing all around the inside of the abandoned goat pen. Monica's son had been traveling through the woods the day before, and he had the feeling that something was watching him and that he was being followed. It should be noted that our hike through the woods took 4 hours total, and at various points throughout our hike, we noticed the same musky, sweaty horse smell that was prevalent around the original oak tree. The smell seemed to hang out in certain spots, and it wasn't drifting through the air, as you could walk into the smell and take 2 steps and be out of it. Monica explained that several months before she reported the incident, she and her son had gone out to feed the goats that they raise. They had noticed that the very young goats had started coming up missing. It was at night, so it was very dark in their backyard. While Monica and her son were feeding the goats, they heard a low growl from behind them. The growl sounded very close, but they couldn't see anything. Monica said that her first impression was that the growl had came from a big cat. A Sasquatch as a possibility never occurred to her. The witness remembered later that she and her son had discovered that another goat had disappeared. The witness remembered at the time she started finding dead goats. They were not eaten, but merely dismembered. The witness also said that her geese had started turning up missing. Monica stated that on the day of her visual encounter, she was busy cooking dinner and dealing with family matters, and it was still daylight outside. She reportedly looked out her kitchen window into the backyard and saw a very large animal standing on two legs. The animal was very hairy and it was black in color. To the witness, the animal looked like a prehistoric man. She could only see the profile of the subject and it was not moving, but her view was clear. She estimated the distance to be approximately 50 or 60 feet between her and the subject. She described it as standing 8 to 9 feet tall and weighing 800 to 1,000 pounds. She claimed that it had ape-like arms hanging low to its sides. The subject stood hunched over. She could guess the height because the subject stood next to a tree that was 9 feet tall. Monica recalled that after watching the creature for a short while, she sat down to collect her thoughts. The whole incident seemed very surreal to her. After realizing what had happened, she stood up to get another look, but he was gone. She guessed that he must have walked back into the woods. Monica decided to tell her husband and son what she had seen. Her husband ridiculed her. Her son grabbed his gun and immediately went out to investigate, but there was no sign of the subject. The son stated that when he was looking around, he heard gunshots from the woods and heard two men yelling at each other. According to the son, he heard the one male voice say, "What was that?" Another male voice answered, "Let's get the hell out of here." Since this incident, the witness and her son moved the goats to a different location. The witness and her husband now live elsewhere as well. Other incidents have been reported in the same area as well. The witness's son, who lives in the same house where she had her sighting, has heard an unknown animal moaning and groaning and breathing heavily outside the windows. The witness's friend, an EMT, reportedly had a very large animal run across the road in front of her. Also, another friend's grandson reported seeing a Bigfoot step out of the woods and onto a road very close to where he was standing.